Yeah, I'm Will. I'm the access and outreach consultant for Corpus, and I'll just be giving a brief talk on making a competitive application to Cambridge for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll ask, I'll answer any sort of generic questions you might have about the admissions process or philosophy as well. I should also mention that I studied philosophy at Cambridge a while ago. Maybe about 5-7 years ago, so now. And I'm currently doing a PhD in philosophy. So hopefully, if you've got any like philosophical questions as well, I can have a go at answering those. The main research area that I do is sort of metaphysics and the philosophy of mind. So especially if people have questions about consciousness and stuff in the Q&A, that would be fun. But yeah, so this is meant to be just a very brief guide to making a competitive application. It's meant to be useful for if you want to make an application to Oxbridge, but also hopefully for other universities as well. Briefly, I'm going to talk very briefly about Cambridge itself as a university and the collegiate system. I'm then going to give you a brief overview of the application process, and finally, we'll talk a bit about supercurricular engagement, which is the kind of stuff that we think is important for you to be doing at the moment, to optimize your chances of success in an application with us. So a little bit on Cambridge first of all. So we're the fourth oldest surviving university in the world. We founded in 1209. We're one of the best universities in the world as well. And we have students coming from all over the UK, international students from all over the world who want to come and study with us. We've got a really, really large range of courses. So we've got 30 courses, and we've got standard things on offer, like philosophy, like economics and sciences and stuff. But we also offer interesting, quite niche courses that you might not have heard about, like Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic. And we've got really good options within our degrees as well. So typically, if you're interested, say, in philosophy, which I assume you guys are, we cover most philosophy. We've got lots of really, really interesting modules on offer. And actually, I'll talk about this in a bit, but we've got a really good range of academics at Corpus as well that cover a really broad range of interests. Typically, we get about 3,500 students coming to study with us each year. And we are a collegiate university. So you probably, I don't know how much this has come up in Q&As with the students, but we are not a sort of centralized university. There's no kind of main center point that is the university. Instead, we're divided up into lots of different colleges and also departments. And colleges are essentially where you live for the duration of your undergraduate degree. Unlike a lot of universities, we offer accommodation in the college that you go to throughout the whole of your degree. So it's not like you spend 1 year in halls and then you go and live in a flat with a few of your friends. You get to spend the entire 3 or 4 years studying and living within the college itself. And that's really, really nice. It makes it far more, it gives you much more of a kind of community vibe, I guess, than perhaps some of other universities can offer. So like I mentioned, you live there, you have your accommodation there, and there are a lot of opportunities for socializing there as well. Lots of things like extracurricular activities to get involved in. There's also, it's also a place where you might have quite a bit of teaching. The teaching is organized through your department. So for philosophy, it will be organized by the philosophy department, but you will have supervisions in college as well, because you have, we have quite a few academics here that specialize in various things in philosophy, and you would have supervisions with them typically throughout your undergrad. And we provide lots of support as a college. So we provide lots of academic supports. We provide sort of welfare stuff. So people have, so as a student, you'll have a tutor who kind of is in charge of your welfare, kind of, the more academic side of your well-being. And you'll also have a director of studies who kind of looks after you academically, does quite a bit. And we have a lot of financial support as well. Sorry, James, is my Wi-Fi still cutting out a bit?
Yeah, a little bit, Will. You might have to turn your camera off.
Oh, okay. Let me know if this is any better. Has that helped things?
Yes, a little bit better, Will. You crack on.
Okay. Yeah, apologies if I'm sort of fading in and out a bit. Okay, good. So yeah, we also offer quite a lot of financial support. In terms of choosing a college, so I'll talk about this, yeah, very briefly, but it's really, you're really going to want to base college choice on non-academic considerations. So whether or not you like, the architecture of the place, for instance, you might think, oh, I really like old buildings, for instance, I'd like to live somewhere, like Corpus, which is pretty old. Or you might really, really like more modern architecture, and you think, actually, I'd like to live somewhere that looks a bit more modern. That can be a very legitimate choice when choosing between colleges. Asking how large the college is, I mean, there isn't a massive difference between how big the colleges are, but I mean, Corpus is pretty small. So we take about 90 students per year, whereas some colleges, like Downing, for instance, can take upwards of 300, 400. So it does vary a fair bit, but all colleges kind of have the same basic structure of being quite close-knit communities, quite small, close-knit communities. And the other thing you might want to consider is whether or not the college is in the outskirts of Cambridge, or if it's more in the centre. And there are benefits to both of those things. But yeah, they're very non-academic considerations when choosing a college. Okay, so a bit about Corpus. So we're one of the older colleges. We're the 6th oldest college, founded in 1352. And we take about 94 to 96 students per year. So we are a very small college. We're very centrally located, and because we are a small college, we have a very kind of close-knit, friendly undergrad community. And we also have a good ratio of students to teachers. So, I mean, it's quite self-explanatory, right? But if you have fewer students and the same number of teachers, say, or more teachers, you get more time and you get more of our resources directed at you, basically. And philosophy at Corpus is particularly good. I think we've got 3 academics whose interests cover a really wide range of subjects. We've got Dr. Sarah Fine, who specializes in issues related to migration, borders, and citizenship. And we also have Professor James Warren, who looks at a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, Hellenistic philosophy. And we've got Dr. Marina Frasca-Spada, who has a really, really wide range of interests, including metaphysics, philosophy of science, modern aesthetics, 18th century studies, and also history of early modern philosophy, Descartes to Kant. So yeah, hopefully you guys can see some things that might be of interest to you in that. In cases where you've got an interest that isn't covered by the academics at the college, and you say you want to be supervised for a third-year dissertation on something that no one does, maybe on let's say an aspect of philosophy of science that Marina doesn't do, for instance, then you can always get a supervisor from another college to give you tutorials in that area as well. So there's by no means exhaustive of all the stuff you would be, all the philosophy that you'd be exposed to. But I think we've got a pretty good range. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about the application process. So hopefully this graphic is useful, and this is quite a nice it's quite a nice sort of bird's eye view of the timeline here. So I'll go into a couple of these in detail in a second, but for now I'll kind of just have a look at the more bird's eye view here. So you'll choose a course. This is something that you can start thinking about now, what course you might want to do. I imagine lots of you want to do philosophy or something similar, given that you're here. You'll also want to decide which college you want to go to. This is, I think, less significant than choosing the course. Like I said, college choice is based on more non-academic factors, but it's still something that's good to think about. You can choose a college yourself on the basis of some of the things that I mentioned before, or you can choose to do an open application where you're randomly allocated a college to apply to. You'll want to make sure that you know what you're doing RE admissions assessments quite early on. It's good to have that in the back of your head. I'll talk about that briefly in a moment. You'll want to you also want to apply to us through UCAS, like any other university, but we have a deadline of the 16th of October. We'll also send you additional information that UCAS won't ask for in the My Cambridge application, and that kind of just gets there. We ask you information that we don't get in UCAS and is useful for us with assessing your application. Things like class sizes, modules you're doing in A-level and stuff like that, which are quite helpful for us. You might have to submit written work for some subjects, and you might have to take an admissions assessment, and that will come sort of after you've applied, and after UCAS, sorry. And one of the sort of final stages for us is we interview. So if there's time, I'll talk a little bit about the interview as one of the last things here. And we normally give you the decision in January whether or not we're going to make you an offer. So a few things to go into. One of the things that is very useful to be thinking about now is the structure of the course. I mean, you want to pick a course that you're going to enjoy. You want to make sure that, say you really like religious studies or philosophy in A-level, you want to make sure that the content you're going to be looking at university for a particular course, for instance, is going to be stuff that interests you. I mean, I think we do quite a wide range of stuff. Most topics we cover and you'll be able to look into, but there are still situations where another degree might be more suited, or a course at another university. So I would recommend now looking on the course, the course structure information for universities you're thinking of applying for courses you want to apply for. So at Cambridge for philosophy, you take 5 compulsory papers first year. So everyone does metaphysics, ethics, and political philosophy, meaning, formal methods, and also set texts. And then the options kind of gradually become more relaxed. So in second year, you do 2 compulsory papers. So everyone does knowledge, language, and the world, the general paper. And in third year, you can pick anything you want to do. So you could focus a lot more on ancient philosophy, or philosophy of science, or logic, or ethics, or metaphysics. You could do a mixture of things. And you also have the opportunity to write a big dissertation in third year as well, focusing on anything you want from any of these kinds of areas that we offer. So like I said, this is important stuff to be thinking about now, and you want to make sure that, I mean, actually, this is one of the reasons why, so I'll talk about supercurricular stuff at the end, but this is one of the reasons why we encourage you to start doing supercurricular engagement now, because it means that you can figure out which course is actually going to be right for you. If you see that we do a lot of metaphysics, for instance, or a lot of logic in our course, and you look into those subjects and you think, actually, these things don't interest me, I'm way more interested in all of just like the politics, for instance, then you might think about doing HSBS instead, for instance. So it's good to start working on these sorts of things now, so that you can so that you can know what you're that you're picking the right course. You also want to check admissions assessments arrangements. For philosophy, we have an assessment that will take pretty much just before you do your interview, and we use this in part to decide who to offer places to. This comes into the application process, and it consists of 20 multiple choice questions that are sort of logic based, and 1 essay question that is much more sort of standard issue philosophy, probably what you think of as philosophy more generally. So here we've got an example of one of the logic questions. So they present this argument, and they say, okay, well, look at the structure of this argument, and then they give you these options. And some of these look quite similar. Some of these look perhaps not very similar at all to the argument above. And they ask you which one has the same structure. And obviously, one of the things that they're looking for there is to sort of see if you can analyze the structures of arguments and kind of pick out salient information, and maybe even not get hoodwinked by red herrings. For instance, some of the arguments from A to E look like they might be a bit similar, but maybe for the wrong reasons. if you're thinking about the structure of an argument, for instance. And the question down here is the future open in any sense in which the past isn't? And that's a really interesting question, and I want you to write an essay on that. On a question very much like it anyway. And this is kind of more actual philosophy, like I said. You want to be, I mean, you want to break down the question, define the key terms, and argue for a particular point of view. And you might argue that maybe you think that the past and future aren't open at all, and then that neither are open in any interesting sense because something like determinism is true. Or maybe you think that the future has an open structure. Maybe you think that the presence of indeterminism in the world means that future events aren't fixed. You might even think that the future isn't open because there's no present moment. There's no present in the sense that there's no privileged time that's marked out as any present moment, and so all of time kind of exists on a par with each other. So there's no sense in which the future is open, the past is not. Time is kind of relative to others. So yeah, and the best way to practice these kinds of things for the logic questions, it's good to try and do some logic. There are lots of resources online. I'll point you towards some at the end. Cambridge use the 4X textbook, which I can put, if people are interested, I can put in the chat in a bit. But they use that to teach most of the logic in first year, and that can be worth having a brief look through for these kinds of questions, and also just practicing the admissions assessments that are already online is good. And for the essay question, one of the key things to do is to make sure that you're actually answering the question. So what they don't want you to do is go into a whole load of detail on stuff that you've just learned in A-level that you're trying to make salient in the question. They want you to, very straightforwardly define key terms, set out how you understand future, open, past, what you think the terms of the question are, and then really present novel arguments or analyses that you're kind of just coming up with on the spot in many respects for this kind of stuff. I can talk about that more if people want me to in the Q&A. I won't talk too much about the interview now because it's quite far away, but let's just take a second to look at this slide. We basically interview people as the last stage of the application process, and what we're looking for briefly is we're assessing how you would fare basically in a supervision setting. So one of the things that we do at Cambridge, one of the things that sets Oxford and Cambridge apart from other universities is we have a lot of one-to-one supervision. And that's one of the key ways in which you learn. So if you're interested in doing philosophy here, that's one of the benefits that you will receive. You'll get way more mentorship than other universities. And the interview is just designed to see if you get on well in that environment. Are you the sort of person that would learn from sitting down with an academic for 20 minutes in the case of the interview, an hour typically in the case of the supervision? So you think about it like a trial lesson, basically. But I'm happy to answer questions about the interview if people have them at the end. There are also good online resources for the interview that you might want to have a look at. I assume we'll send something like this PowerPoint round, but these resources are easy to find online as well. And they just give you, we've got lots of these videos where current students are pretending to be applicants and doing these interviews, and it gives you a nice sense of how they run. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is what we actually look for in an application. And some of the things that really can take an application to the next level, I guess. So we are a very competitive university. So you can see the stats from last year. We had 20,000 students competing for about 3,500 places. So, I mean, typically we just can't make offers to all of the people that we would like to make offers to. So it is very competitive, and actually it is maybe useful to say even at this stage that not getting in doesn't mean that, we didn't think you were any good. It means that it's just a wildly competitive process. But some of the key things that we look for, and what the admissions process is designed to help us find, we look for enthusiasm in students. So we want to make sure that students really, really like the subject. We want to make sure that, if you're applying to do philosophy, that philosophy is something that you find absolutely amazing and you can't wait to do loads and loads of it. But you don't have to, obviously you don't have to live and breathe philosophy. You don't have to be doing it every waking moment. You can be, you can also be looking at philosophy and think, I'd rather, be outside or doing something else. We're not looking for absolutely crazy levels of enthusiasm, but we want students to be enthusiastic. And we want students to have the motivation to do well as well. We want you, we don't want you just to be really excited about philosophy, but we want students who will be able to work hard and achieve good results. And we also look for academic potential. I mean, there are numerous ways to think about that, but we might look for logical competence, or competence in analyzing arguments or thinking about metaphysics, for instance, but also stuff like your capacity to learn independently. That's another thing that we look for. We want to make sure that you're the kind of person that could read a few papers or book before a supervision on your own, create an essay out of those resources, and then discuss that essay and learn and make progress with an academic, all within the course of about a week. That's sort of how the supervision system works. So we look for that as well. And we make very holistic decisions. So we're not, we look at your personal statement and we've suddenly made a snap judgment or something, or we look at the interview and we only, we weight that really harshly or something. We instead take all of the information that we've gathered about you, things like personal statement, teacher references, your admissions results, your predicted grades, your interview performance as well, and we use all of that to make the decision. And the reason that's important is because you might fall short in a certain area, but we'll still be able to see that you have enthusiasm, motivation, and potential. So you might do a really bad interview because you're nervous, but all of the rest of your application is absolutely amazing. So we're not going to necessarily reject you on that basis. And we also contextualize every application. We look at the school, class sizes, any extenuating circumstances, various other various other sort of contextual factors as well. But given what I said, one of the key things that you should be doing at the moment, if you want to maximize your chances of having a really competitive application, is looking at supercurricular or doing supercurricular engagement. So I mentioned that we look for people who are very good at researching independently, basically. And by that, I mean looking at content that interests you, that's related to the subject that you want to do. So in this case, maybe philosophy, and also stretches you beyond what the A-level syllabus has given you. Obviously, in philosophy, it's slightly different from other subjects because not everyone does philosophy in A-level. But the idea is that even if you don't do philosophy, there are certain things that you can do that kind of go beyond typically like the quality of the A-level or the depth of the A-level courses that you're doing. And this is really the key thing that you want to be doing from now until applying, and then after really as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to spend your time doing this and what this actually amounts to. So yeah, in a second I'll give you a few resources, and maybe I'll suggest more actually the Q&A. But in terms of how to actually use your time when you're doing supercurricular engagement, it's very, very useful to have a plan of what you want to actually explore, what you want to look at. And that should be quite flexible. So you don't need to create a plan that stretches from now until you apply for a UCAS, for instance. You kind of just want to have an idea of, say, the topics that you find interesting, and then if there's anything interesting in the vicinity that you want to read. So you might be interested in metaphysics, and you might think, oh, look, well, I've heard people talk about Descartes' meditations. People often seem to look at that. I'd like to know what he's up to there. So you might think, well, I'd like to just, of a week or an afternoon read Descartes' Meditations or something like that. And then if you start reading it and you think, actually, I hate epistemology and metaphysics, it's rubbish, you don't need to feel the need to continue with that. Part of this, as I sort of mentioned before, part of the reason for doing supercurricular engagement is to figure out what you're interested in. And so it's not a bad thing if your course, if the course you want to do changes with doing supercurricular activity, that suggests that you're doing it correctly, to be honest. It's good to keep a workbook as well. So you can just jot down, the stuff that you've read, but also it's nice to have like an actual workbook where you write down your thoughts when you're, say you're reading the Meditations and you think, okay, what does Descartes mean that he can justify, his existence by looking at God, but he has to do it the other way around as well, for instance, and you can write a little bit about that. And then that's really useful because anything that you do ends up in the supercurricular workbook. And when you're writing the personal statement, or even just when you're preparing for interview or thinking, what should I look at next? You've got this nice resource there ready. And you're not going to forget stuff that you've looked at. Okay, good. I've mentioned that if you're not enjoying a resource, you don't need to finish it. I don't think I have more to say on that. And yeah, it can be useful to try and do something every day. So you might find an academic paper that's particularly useful, and you might think, oh, well, this is 30 pages, say. I don't want to sit down and go through all of this now because that sounds quite intense. But you might pick, you might do 5 pages or 10 pages every day. And breaking things down into small chunks and doing it every day obviously means that you're actually keeping up this kind of engagement continuously, but it just makes everything a lot easier to do. I think engaging with academic content can be quite daunting, especially when there's a lot of it. So breaking it up and doing it each day is a good thing to do. And it is also useful to to try and find a way to be disciplined with this kind of stuff. To be honest, just saying I'm going to read 10 pages every day of something, I'm going to make sure that I read something and write something every day or every week. That's already a good way of trying to be disciplined. You could tick it off in a calendar, for instance. And the final thing to say here is that it's not just, I've kind of hinted at this already, but it's not just reading that you should be doing. You don't need to read everything under the sun. Actually, it's better to read, rather than reading a whole book, to read, say, a chapter in a book and actually really, really think about it. So, you might read a chapter of a book over a week, maybe less, but you might take a week and you might read 5-10 pages, and you might make notes every time you read. You might have a kind of stream of consciousness of thoughts going on. You might think of objections and worries and ideas related to what you're looking at. That's a really good thing to do. And you also might actually vocalize some of this stuff. So you might want to talk to other people. I mean, you can, it's nice that other people in your school want to do a similar subject, or even if they don't. I think I found when I was applying for philosophy that STEM students, people doing the sciences and maths, actually were quite useful to talk to as well, because they were doing lots of stuff that I was interested in, but from a different angle. And obviously you can always just practice talking to household members as well. That can be even if they're not thinking about the same things as you, you can try explaining ideas to them, and that can be very useful as well. Okay, so there are a few suggestions for supercurricular activities here. A few essay competitions that you might apply to. There are a couple of online resources which are quite good. So there's another logic one that I'll put in the chat in the Q&A, but there's an introduction to logic here, which is quite good. That gives you a bit of grounding in the kind of formal stuff that we look at in undergraduate. There's the Royal Institute of Philosophy as well, which has some useful resources, and also talks by some philosophers that are kind of explaining some of the quite interesting ideas. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, people might have heard of that already. It's just this amazing database with all of these articles about pretty much every philosophy topic you can think of. Some of them can be very challenging, and some of them can be a bit easier. They're all meant to be introductions to a topic. but they vary in how complicated they are, depending on the topic and also depending on who's written them. But that's a really good resource to look at. And there are a couple of books there. Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, I think, is a particularly good one for getting into sort of issues in metaphysics and epistemology, thinking about various interesting issues, and Russell writes very nicely. And okay, finally, there's just quite a useful graphic here for supercurricular engagement, which yeah, I think it's quite useful to think like this, and you could have something similar on paper or on a board or something. Yeah, so it starts with stuff that you've already done. That's quite nice. You can think, even if the term supercurricular engagement is something that's new to you, you can probably find stuff that you've read or thought about or done or watched or listened to already, and it's quite nice to have a starting point there, thinking, look, I've actually already done some of this stuff. That's quite nice. I should mention actually that the masterclass is one such supercurricular activity. You've been listening to academic talks. You've listened to one. I think you're listening to another this afternoon. And then you can think about the themes that interest you. You could use the course content. You could look at the philosophy course and think, okay, I think that political philosophy and maybe some of these set texts are quite cool. And then you can write down, that down, and then you can use that as a bit of a springboard for thinking about what you want to know more about. And I quite like this model because one of them here is a book that, I'd like to read this book, but also some of these things are questions. How does logic help us answer philosophical questions? And then the idea from that is, okay, that's a really nice question. You can probably think of stuff like that you're interested in, but then you can go and explore and think about that as a research question. And then you're kind of doing research already, rather than just trying to read everything under the sun in a more undirected way. So I think we're at time now, so I will stop there. And I guess we'll go on to the questions. James, is the idea that are you going to ask me questions from the chat? Yeah.
Do you want to stop sharing, Will, so then we can see your face and you can turn your camera back on?
Yeah.
Great. And also, this is Dr. Sarah Fine, everyone, who's like a very, 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 very good person. She's early, which is always good. But possibly there might be a question that I might throw to you, Sarah, if that's okay. Might catch you unawares. So, Will, a couple of questions around about sort of the personal statement, but I'm going to sort of smush them together. So,
Sure.
What do you think makes a good personal statement? And someone here has asked specifically, does it have to be unique?
Okay, good. Yeah. So I might take the uniqueness aspect of this first, and I'd be inclined to answer no. You don't want to be worried like, oh, is my personal statement going to stand out? I have to be trying to find material that other people aren't going to have looked at, for instance. You want to be doing stuff that's interesting to you. So one of the reasons I mentioned Descartes' Meditations is that's something that loads of people will look at, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's an interesting book, it's accessible as well, and you can have a lot of interesting and unique thoughts about it. So I would say focus on just what you find interesting, and really focus on actually engaging with the text that you're looking at. So if it is something like Descartes, the thing that's going to make your application stand out is the actual engagement, the sort of supercurricular thinking further about that. So, you might, I think with Descartes, I'd say you probably want to read all of it because it's written as though you're meant to read it over like 7 days or whatever. But, you might read all of it and you might think, okay, look, the God question really interests me. How is it the case that God is doing all of this epistemological work in Descartes' system, but also we started out thinking that we knew nothing. So how does that work? And you might read a few further things on that, for instance. You might write an essay on it, and that's what's going to look good to us. And also, the other thing I should mention is that even in undergrad, often people have very similar ideas about stuff. There are lots of cases where someone will write an essay, and it's a really good essay, but it's not an idea that is novel or unique, and that doesn't really matter in a lot of respects. It's only later that you're really going to be pushed to try and come up with original content. People are always telling me that I need to come up with original content for my PhD, but like that's the kind of level at which you need to stop worrying about Okay, and in terms of so that's the sort of uniqueness part. In terms of a good personal statement more generally, you want to structure it around supercurricular engagement. That's one of the main things. So it's fine to talk about your A levels a little bit, and I think actually with philosophy, you probably do want a little bit of content on the A levels, because you say you're studying, let's say, biology, maths, and English. Those are the ones I think I did. You might want to explain. Did I do that? Oh, I did religious studies as well. But you might want to explain a bit about how you see those subjects fitting in to philosophy, especially if, say, you're really interested in, let's say, metaphysical debates about whether biological organisms exist. Say that's been inspired by your biology A levels, and you've then gone away and looked at someone like Peter van Inwagen, for instance. You could kind of almost tie that into some of the supercurricular stuff. But primarily, you want a nice organized structure explaining what kind of supercurricular engagement you've done and telling us a little bit about those things. So I should have said, actually, instead of so you don't want to just list everything. You want to say, look, I've looked at some questions in epistemology, I've looked at some ethics, maybe I've looked at some phil of science as well. Those are my interests. And then you want to actually tell us a little bit about what you think in those areas. So you might say, okay, look, I did this research question. I asked about the role of God in Descartes' Meditations, and you can tell us, say, further things you read as well. So, now we know you've read the Meditations, but then say we know you've looked at the Stanford Encyclopedia for this, you've listened to a podcast about it, and you've read some open access academic paper. And then you can tell us a bit about maybe what you concluded. And obviously then there's this nice balance. You need to get this balance right of something that's quite concise, where you can say that you've done multiple things like that, but also that gives us enough information. I'm sorry, that was a bit rambly, but I don't know if Sarah, if you want to add anything to that.
I thought that was great. I think the main thing I would add is not to worry too much about your personal statement. I think it can be a bit daunting when you're thinking about how to write it and how to present yourself. But actually, all we're looking for really is somebody who's interested in the subject, who has a good sense of what sort of thing they might encounter, because, we don't want somebody to be dreadfully surprised when they arrive and they find it's completely different from what they were expecting. And that's pretty much it. So I wouldn't go out of your way to spend all your time preparing your personal statement or doing things to put on your personal statement. I would spend more of your time just enjoying learning about philosophy and thinking a bit more about why you want to do it in the first place.
Yeah. The very best personal statements read not like, okay, I want to study this subject, so then I did all these things. The best personal statements read about, you can just tell that they are interested in this particular philosophical problem or this particular type of philosophical school, or how this particular philosophy relates to a modern world problem. And they just want, and the best students just want to talk about it. They live and breathe it. So it's the way about, that's why we always stress, why both Sarah and Will stress, you've got to find the things you enjoy. Yeah, I think a lot of you worry about writing about things that Dr. Fine is going to want to read, or what Will would want to read, or what I would want to read. Forget that. Your personal statement is an advert of what you are interested in and what makes you tick as a student. So, anything, just find the thing that you enjoy and that you want to talk about would be my best recommendation. This is possibly a question probably more for Sarah than Will. Although much of the interview is unexpected, are there any sort of like set questions that we could expect?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think one thing to cover while preparing for your interview is a very simple question, which is, why do you want to study philosophy? And you're likely to get some version of that. It might be a question that picks up on something that you've written in your personal statement, but the interviewers might be interested to hear about why philosophy is the subject that you've selected. Aside from that, I'd be sure to check over your personal statement and any submitted materials, because the interviewers might ask you a question from those. But then the other questions will be questions that the examiners the interviewers have selected to ask everybody, so they won't be specific to you. So I would just prepare by thinking about answering clearly and concisely. I would prepare by making sure that you don't rush in to answer a question, just take your time to think it through. I'd prepare by chatting with other people about philosophical issues that interest you. But yeah, you probably won't be able to guess in advance the exact questions that you'll be asked. But the idea isn't to frighten you or to ask you something that makes you really panic or anything like that. We're just trying to work through a philosophical puzzle or problem or interesting issue with you.
Great, thank you. And then Will, we've got a couple of questions around GCSEs. How important is a candidate's GCSE profile?
I mean, we do look at it, but it's not something that is, you know, say you're worried that you don't have straight nines or something like that. It's not something that you should be worried about. We're going to look way more at the level you're currently at, right? I mean, you know, we recognize that between GCSE and when you come to apply to us, that, you know, you might have, you know, maybe you haven't done so well in your GCSEs, but then you've worked really hard and started, you know, really, yeah, doing really well in your subject. Say, we're going to be more interested in that. I mean, this kind of comes back to what I was saying in the presentation about this holistic way of assessing applications. It is something that's important to look at, but in the situation where somebody applies to us who, you know, is predicted, let's say, you know, they're predicted all A stars and they've got really great teacher references and, you know, they've got a really good personal statement. It's those things that we're going to be more interested in than the GCSEs. So yeah, I wouldn't let worries about, you know, non-standard GCSEs stop you from applying to us, especially if it's the course that you really want to do, and you know, especially if your teachers think, no, you'd be really good. Yeah, hopefully that answers that.
We should also, just to reiterate what Will said earlier on, we contextualize everybody. So we make the judgment, well, not judgment's the wrong word, but we look at your scores relative to the average performance at your school. So, you know, we take that into account, or we try our hardest to take that into account. And then sort of a similar question, I think, and I'll pitch it to Sarah if that's okay. Do we have a preferred A-level combination? Do you have to have done maths, or do you have to have studied philosophy? We get asked this a lot.
No, absolutely don't have to have studied philosophy or maths. We don't really have a preferred combination. Just explain to us why philosophy is something that interests you. So any combination of subjects. I mean, obviously, if you haven't done any essay subjects, you might, you know, be a little rusty with your essays, but that's okay. And, you know, maths can be very helpful because logic is a big component of the philosophy program here in Cambridge, but absolutely not, maths isn't necessary. Great.
Thank you. And, you know, I think we have had people at Corpus, and I mean, I'm sure you both, Will and Sarah, you know, people, undergrads across the university have done the whole host of I bet nearly every A-level is probably covered in the philosophy department or amongst the undergraduates as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, Will, and I'll get both of your opinions actually on this. What do we feel about the extended project qualification? Will, if I come to you first for the EPQ.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that, if you're worried, if you're thinking, oh, should I do it? Is it going to be the sort of tie-breaking thing in an application? I wouldn't worry in that respect. It is something that's useful to have done. If you've got the opportunity to do it, it teaches you research methods and stuff, and it's yeah, it's a nice thing to do in terms of essay writing as well. But it's not something that we require you to do, for instance. James, I was gonna say though, if at a school where everyone's done it and you haven't, I don't know where we stand on that. No,
we don't.
okay.
We don't. Doesn't bother us overly much.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's not going to be the sort of tiebreaker in an application, although it can be useful.
And then a question for Sarah. So the student knows that there is one mandatory logic module, philosophy at Cambridge. Is there anything else which is mandatory that is specifically maths-based in the Cambridge course?
No, we have in the first year, everybody takes the exact same papers, same selection of papers. And so they do ethics and political philosophy, they do some set texts, they do some logic, they do some combination of metaphysics and epistemology and so forth. No, so there isn't anything that is mandatory that requires maths. But just like if you've done English literature and history, that's going to have given you some practice with essay writing and with reading difficult texts and with selecting interesting material from those texts. Similarly, maths is going to have given you some preparation for the sorts of skills that will stand you in good stead during your degree. But that will also be true of economics, and it will be true of psychology, and it will be true of chemistry and so on. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Great.
Logic is a big part of the philosophy degree here, but that's not to say that you can't get by if you're somebody who doesn't think of logic as your favorite part of philosophy.
Yes. And Will has just put in the chat a very useful textbook for the logic if you're interested in getting swatting up on that now. And then I think the last question, Will, and then we'll hand over to Dr. Fine for her talk. Are you able to prepare for the ACT interview admission tests, and is there anything that you can do to get ready for it?
Yeah. So one of the best things is to, and not too early actually, otherwise we'll burn through the resources, but is to start looking at the past papers that we have online. Doing the logic questions is a good thing to start with, and also practicing the essay questions. I mean, I'm sure that you will probably be bored of your teachers telling you in essay writing subjects, you know, to answer the question and not to use things that just aren't salient in the essay, but the same thing applies here. I actually remember that I didn't do that when I applied, and I just wrote this weird essay on, I think, something to do with the self that I've been thinking about, and I'm pretty sure that's not what they wanted. So answering the question, defining the key terms is a very good thing to do. Yeah, and actually the other thing I'll mention is that although I'm not sure it always directly translates, doing some logic practice, some kind of formal logic practice can be quite useful. I mean, if you think about the question that we had up on the PowerPoint, that was looking at argument forms, and one of the things that is looked at very early on in that logic textbook is argument forms. So that's something that's very useful. You don't have to do all of it. There's a lot of stuff in that textbook. I think there's 500 pages. It covers stuff you do in second year as well. It gets on to interesting questions in modal logic. You don't have to do that, but you might want to look at the first few chapters to begin with.